of 5. And the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the University of Minnesota Extension website. And we currently have 2 others that are posted there, the previous webinars. I'm Lori Hendrickson, Family Resource Management Educator with the University of Minnesota. And I would like to introduce my colleagues and webinar production team members today, Sarah Kroymans and Becky Haken-Jokala. Well, we've used it before. The times they are changing. I happen to live in Bob Dylan's hometown, and so in that song, the times they are changing. We've noticed also that our weather is changing as well, and certainly in the last couple of months across the country, we've experienced this. The National Climate Data Center is the nation's scorekeeper in terms of addressing severe weather and climate events in a historical perspective. The map that you see here depicts the number of billion-dollar weather and climate disasters from 1980 to 2011. And as you can see, there has been no shortage of weather or climate disasters. And the U.S. has sustained 144 weather and climate disasters since 1980, where the overall damages or costs have reached or exceeded $1 billion. In 2012, to put this in perspective, there were 11 of these such disasters with losses exceeding $1 billion each across the United States. These 11 disaster events cumulatively caused over $110 billion in damages and 377 deaths. And that made 2012 the second costliest year on record. To assist professionals to help families with their financial recovery, the University of Minnesota Extension is providing this series of 5 webinars. And you see the dates and topics listed on the screen. The previous webinars have focused on what to do now and where to start, with upcoming webinars focusing on helping individuals assess their financial picture, today's topic, and making housing decisions, identifying resources, and creating a new reality. For today's webinar, we hope that you will become familiar with the Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit, also to develop skills in utilizing tools to help survivors assess their current financial situation, and help survivors determine if they can afford another payment. Also, recommend that survivors review their credit report, and truly support survivors as they make informed financial recovery decisions based on their situation. Now, before we get started, we have a few resources we'd like to call to your attention. First, we want to share some valuable URLs. Our toolkit URL. If you haven't already downloaded or viewed the toolkit, you can do that through the URL that we are sharing right now. And we'll be providing this throughout the webinar. It should have also been in the email that you received prior to this webinar. The webinar evaluation. Since this webinar is free of charge, we ask that in return for your participation, you complete a short evaluation at the end of the webinar. And we'll pull this link back at the end of the webinar. For those of you that are accredited financial counselors through AFCPE, the Association for Financial Counseling and Planning Education, CEUs are available. And here's a link for the CEU verification form. You will need a certificate of participation, and we'll show you that in a moment. Should note also that if you are not an accredited financial counselor or have some other accreditation through AFCPE, the certificate of attendance can be provided for your associations to prove that you were a part of this. Our downloads for today, we do have our slides in a PDF format for your future reference. And again, the certificate of participation is provided in the file share pod. We should mention that as you do that, you're going to click on the item that you would like to save and then say save to your computer. And we will once again show you that at the end of the webinar. In addition, we strongly encourage you to be an active participant in today's webinar by asking questions and sharing your thoughts and comments in the chat box. Our colleague, Mary Jo Katras, is helping us to monitor that chat area, and we will do our best to respond to items throughout the webinar. And if we're not able to answer all the questions, we will do our best to get back to you after the webinar. All right, to get things started, we would quickly like to get to know a little bit about who is on the webinar with a few polls. So our first one, as a professional, which disasters have you worked? And for this question, you may select as many answers as appropriate for you. And we'd ask that if you select other, please type in the chat area what other disasters you have worked. Okay, as those are coming in, we're seeing a lot of flood work, also some hurricane, earthquake, tornado. Others, we're seeing some others, lightning storms, homes being burned down, things such as that nature. Okay. And it looks like the majority of the work right now that we're seeing here is in floods. Okay. Thank you for your responses on that one. Our next question then is, what type of organization do you represent in disaster recovery? And again, select the best answer for yourself. And if you do select other, please again share that information about your organization in the chat box. And we're seeing a lot of educational organizations here, a lot of volunteer organizations, about a quarter being volunteer organizations. Okay, yeah, I'm seeing also religious and nonprofit, credit counseling, public health, Salvation Army. Okay. All right. Thank you for your responses on that. We'll pull that one away as well. And today the webinar is focusing on the resources of recovery after disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. And you'll note that on the graphic on the cover of the toolkit, there are several puzzle pieces. We've all had an opportunity to put together picture puzzles, and sometimes they're challenging, but we have experience to draw upon as we fit all the pieces together. After a disaster, survivors will need to think about putting the financial pieces of their lives back together, much in the same way that you might approach solving a picture puzzle. The difference is that they have most likely never had to tackle this type of puzzle before, and there are so many different pieces. Maybe our pre-existing financial situation, our needs, the availability of assistance programs, other options and strategies, but we don't know where to start. And we may not even know what all the pieces are. It's hard to tell how important each piece is or how it will fit together with the others. And during this series of webinars, we'll help you to become familiar with many of the puzzle pieces so you're better equipped to help survivors move towards a new reality. Okay, we have one final poll for you, and we'd like to know if you could please let us know how familiar you are with the Recovery After Disaster, the Family Financial Toolkit. Have you seen and used the toolkit extensively? Have you seen and used the toolkit some? Have you seen the toolkit but not used it? Or never seen or used the toolkit? Okay, and so it looks like we have some new users, new potential users in the audience today. That's great. And so glad that we are able to bring another resource to you. Thank you for that. And again, we'll be sharing the toolkit URL throughout the presentation. Well, you might be wondering how this toolkit came about. As with many places in our country, more disasters were happening in Minnesota, and Extension has a mission to meet community needs. And before we create something, we need to understand the community needs. Through asking those impacted, we asked them particularly, what did you experience? What were the issues? What worked? And what would you like others to know to help them? So after we obtained the answers to these questions, we then created research-based materials to meet the educational needs of those we serve. The toolkit was developed based on research conducted with disaster survivors and professionals 2 years after they were impacted by a flood. The survivors had plenty of time to reflect on their experiences and to share with us what worked and what didn't during the disaster recovery process. The toolkit was then developed in partnership with the University of Minnesota and North Dakota State University. And as our borders share the Red River that runs north, and it seems to cause many flooding issues, particularly during the springtime. This toolkit then was funded by a Smith-Lever Special Needs Grant from the National Institute for Food and Agriculture, or NIFA. And after its development, the toolkit was nationally reviewed and piloted with disaster survivors. This toolkit was designed to be flexible. It's usable. Survivors can download the entire toolkit or just the units that they need. It's consumable. The toolkit is full of tools or forms that can help as one makes decisions. And the tools can be printed out and worked on with paper and pen, or they are available as fillable documents online that can then be saved to your personal computer. It's customizable. States can customize the toolkit for their specific location or state. And currently there are customized versions available for Minnesota and North Dakota. However, there's a non-state specific version that is applicable for other states. And states can request a template in order to customize the toolkit for their state. Now, particularly Unit 9 is something that would be customized, and that's the unit on resources. And please contact us if you'd like some information about customizing the toolkit. Lastly, the toolkit is accessible. It's available online 24/7, 365. And again, the toolkit URL is listed on the screen. There are 9 units in the toolkit, and throughout the webinar series, we'll be covering all of the topics. And today, we're covering Unit 5, Where Am I Financially? At this time, I also want to introduce you to the Younger family. They serve as the resident case study in the toolkit. Sam and Joan live with their 3 children in a small rural town in the upper Midwest, and their town was struck by a tornado. Their situation is used as a learning tool throughout the toolkit, and it may be helpful for other survivors to see how this family has used the various tools. We certainly encourage survivors to make their own best decisions for their situation and not just follow what the Youngers did. We know that everyone's situation in disaster recovery is unique. And this slide simply lists the dates and topics of the webinars in the series, as well as the toolkit units that match up to those. Now I would like to pass the presentation to my colleague Sarah Krymans to continue with Where Am I Financially?
Thank you, Lori. As Lori indicated, this third webinar presentation focuses on Where Am I Financially, which is in the 5th unit of the toolkit. And this unit helps survivors assess their financial situation and start to make plans for the long-term recovery. So knowing the big picture of one's financial situation will definitely help speed recovery, and it's the foundation of folks' recovery puzzle. So we're going to go to the next slide here with one more poll. Because we think about how a family's financial situation prior to a disaster impacts disaster, we thought we'd use this little poll as a brain teaser. So a family who is financially secure prior to a disaster would most likely be better prepared to make financial decisions in disaster recovery, or be not as prepared to face those decisions. All right, most people are going with the first one, that they are better prepared. A few people aren't quite so sure. All right, well, we are going to work our way through looking at financial situations and having people assess their situation. And so hopefully we will build the case too that if a family or individual's financial situation is more secure prior to the disaster, they're probably going to be better situated in making those decisions. So we're going to have a chat here. From your experience, what are some of the financial challenges that disaster survivors face? So we pulled in a chat box, and you will see a white line on the bottom where you can start typing and then just hit that return key so folks can share what are some of those financial challenges. loss of a job or work, accessing funds. So Linda, do you mean accessing recovery funds or even getting to the bank to access folks' money? Cost of temporary housing. I can't get to the bank. Paying for those unexpected expenses. Oh, inadequate insurance, that's a huge one. Needing funds to rebuild. No emergency fund. All right, so folks haven't set aside for that rainy day. Thank you, Linda. So both of those related to accessing funds. Money for rebuilding, temporary housing costs. Oh, food, because of course there is no kitchen if the home has sustained major damage, so then they're going to have to eat more expensive. Eating out is more expensive. Having to replace clothes to continue living. No or limited insurance. Oh, scammers. That is huge, definitely. Trying to figure out where to go for assistance. Oh, loss of paperwork. We're going to be talking a little bit about that as well. Time off from work to deal with the issues, and that might be no income at that time because they may not have vacation time or other benefits. Definitely replacing those basic need items. So folks who are impacted by a disaster are facing a multitude of financial challenges. And there's not just one, but there are many, and it's a very complex situation. Thank you for sharing. We are now going to have some audio quotes from some disaster survivors on their reflection.
All of our savings is gone, and our spirits are very low. We only had 4 years left to pay on our house, and now we will have to work till we're 100 plus.
All right, that audio didn't match our quote, but we are going to try that one more time to see if we can get that audio to match.
This has been one of the most stressful situations I have ever been in. We have had good days and extremely bad days. Financially, it is very depressing. It seems like no one cares, and we have lost at least 2 years of our lives.
And now another survivor.
We're doing okay. We are now laden with debt. Our neighbors have fared much worse than us.
That quote seems to be pretty typical up here in the Midwest where people are oftentimes more concerned about their neighbors. Now we've got one final quote.
Before the flood, we had a savings account and our home was paid for. We have struggled to rebuild our home and have used all our savings to pay for our home again.
As we have heard, financial recovery can be very challenging for survivors. And so to assist disaster survivors in determining where they are financially, we suggest folks complete the following 5 steps. First, to assess monthly income and expenses, to determine net worth, to determine if they can afford another payment. Number 4 is to review credit report. And then the 5th step is to summarize their current financial situation from the previous steps. Now, if an individual or family has not experienced a disaster, they can do a lot of prep work in this area prior to the disaster in order to have their financial house in order. We encourage you as helping professionals to become familiar with all of the concepts, strategies, and tools presented in the toolkit, specifically the financial tools that we are sharing today from Unit 5. Oftentimes, disaster recovery professionals are skilled case managers and are very familiar with the resources available, but they may not have the financial management or financial education background. In fact, we have heard from many professionals that they shy away from the financial topic because they are not comfortable managing their own finances. So we encourage you as helping professionals to take time to complete the tools in the toolkit with your own personal information so you are comfortable using them and are better prepared to help others to help those survivors. Now we're going to walk through each of these 5 steps. All right, so this first one is to assess monthly income and expenses. And so it is important for survivors to step back and assess their monthly income and expenses so they have current information that can inform their decision making. This first step involves developing a monthly spending plan or budget. And if you can envision kind of a continuum, it's important for folks to look at what was their situation pre-disaster and what is their situation post-disaster. The spending plan tool provided in the toolkit provides space for survivors to consider income and expenses, again, prior to the disaster, as well as their current post-disaster status. Income can pretty much be defined as any type of money that comes into the home. Income from a job, retirement benefits, any of those sorts of things. And we typically encourage folks when they're identifying income to count only the income that is consistent and that they know is coming in, and to work with net income or that take-home pay rather than gross income, because it's important to know what kind of money or income is actually available to work with. So this is the first page of the spending plan, and you can see that, again, we're looking at income coming into the home, and we're looking at prior to the disaster and then post-disaster. And then, of course, we have a space on the form for folks to track that during months 1, 2, and 3 following the disaster. This slide depicts the second page of the budget or spending plan, which starts to look at expenses. And so here we're looking at housing, food, and transportation categories. And you will note that, again, space is provided on the form to track income and expenses for those 3 months to help folks monitor their situation. And we'll talk about tracking expenses in just a little bit. This slide shows the next page, where we continue to look at expenses in the categories of health, personal and savings, and debt payments. And so when working on a spending plan, it is important for folks to have a clear picture of what does it cost to live on a monthly basis. And that involves incorporating the fixed, flexible, and periodic or non-monthly expenses. I often find when I work with families that it's those periodic expenses that they kind of forget about and don't really take into account on a monthly basis. So for example, if a family pays $300 every 6 months for vehicle insurance, that's a periodic expense because it's not paid monthly. But so we need to take that amount and divide it by however many months they take between payments. So for example, the $300 divided by 6 months averages to $50 a month. So we would plug that into the spending plan. And by doing this, the individual or family will have a clearer picture of what their average monthly expenses are. This last page of the spending plan provides space to summarize the income and the expenses. So we look at what those totals are, and we do a little bit of comparing on what their situation looks like. As the family tracks and records income and expenses over time using the spending plan, it's important to review and reflect on the spending plan. And so there's some questions that are good to think about here. First, has income changed post-disaster? Someone mentioned earlier an individual may lose a job, or maybe their hours got cut. Have housing expenses increased? Someone mentioned that one as well. The temporary housing most likely would increase housing expenses. What other types of expenses have changed? Do they need to drive further to get to work? Have daycare expenses increased? So to think through what expenses have changed. Do the post-disaster expenses outweigh current income? How are disaster-related expenses affecting the budget? How do the pre and post expense and income compare? So again, looking at that bottom line. Do adjustments need to be made, and what might those be? And then to identify what resources are needed to get the budget to balance. So lots of questions to think about and to respond to when reflecting on the spending plan or budget. Now, it's also important to track income and expenses, right? It's sometimes very hard to know how much we've spent if we haven't tracked that. And so survivors can use the actual income and spending columns to track their income. In the toolkit also, we have the younger family case study that Lori introduced earlier. And so there's an example there of how they worked with their income. And so again, here are some quick tips for tracking income and spending. So first, who will do it? It's probably a good idea to identify one person within the family who's responsible for this task. It's important to choose a tracking method that works and to use it consistently. Maybe it's saving receipts or in a Ziploc bag or in a tote, or using a calendar or envelopes in which receipts are saved to track expenses throughout the month. It's also important to choose a safe and convenient place to do the tracking. And we cannot emphasize enough that it is so very important for disaster survivors to save all of those disaster-related receipts in a special place each month. Again, if it's a Ziploc bag or an envelope or a tote. But these receipts will be needed later to make insurance claims, file taxes, and to apply for assistance to cover disaster-related expenses. And most times, if folks don't have a receipt, they're not going to be reimbursed or that expense won't be covered. So after tracking income and expenses each month, survivors need to take time to compare them to the budget or spending plan that was developed. The survivors can make a note in the comments or plans for change column provided on the spending plan. For example, they might note that, oh, we dropped the cable service, so that's gone, or daycare expenses have increased because the kids have had to be in daycare longer as we've addressed the cleanup. But here are some things for survivors to consider if their expenses are greater than their income. First is to prioritize bills. Mortgage or rent, food, transportation, and health bills may need to take priority over other expenses. For example, in our case study, Sam and Joan had to cut spending in several categories after Joan lost her job and their disaster expenses rose. Determine the consequences of missed mortgage payments. So if mortgage payments are missed, one may risk losing their home. And it's important to go back to that mortgage loan agreement to determine the consequences for missed payments. And to do that prior or before one misses a payment. Negotiate payments with creditors if needed. And so definitely survivors should make every effort to keep up with their bills, but we encourage them to contact creditors as needed to negotiate those payment plans before payments are missed. Creditors tend to be more willing to work with people if they're contacted ahead of time. We encourage folks to work with a financial educator or counselor to explore strategies and options. And it's important to explore as many strategies and options as possible. The toolkit provides lots of ideas, but there are a ton of other ideas and options available. So ask others for suggestions and try new ways to cut expenses as needed. Identify financial resources and assistance to help with those housing costs. Unit 6 and 7 of the toolkit, which will be a topic in a future webinar, has more information on financial resources and assistance that may be available to help survivors with housing costs. And then Unit 9 in the toolkit has more information on resources and assistance for recovery. We now have some words from a financial professional. Sean Fields, who is with Affinity Plus Credit Union, will share thoughts on several aspects of financial recovery, including spending plans, net worth, and determining a debt to gross income ratio. Sean's clip is approximately 3 minutes here, so we're going to go ahead and take a listen.
Well, in kind of starting with net worth and really looking at, calculating one's net worth, taking what your assets are and then subtracting your liabilities, or that net worth is great. Knowing your net worth is great in terms of just kind of a snapshot of your financial health, and it's another great thing to just kind of track over time. But in terms of using that to make recovery decisions, it really leads to kind of knowing what your options are and identifying those options. To know what your assets and what those assets are for. Are they retirement accounts? Are they non-retirement accounts? You start to build a picture of what can I do in a post-recovery situation? What can I potentially liquidate? And so having a clear picture of that really just leads to options and what your options are, and knowing those options in comparison to what your other options are. That's really where you can make a cost-benefit analysis of these various options and really figure out what's going to work specifically for you in your unique situation. Having an idea of it ahead of time is just a good rule of thumb. One, it's kind of like I was mentioning before with just having that knowledge of what your net worth is and tracking it over time is a good indicator of of financial health, but then also, in a when if a disaster happened, to kind of, as a part of that plan, to kind of re-examine that, see where it's at today. Again, that's where you're going to drive some insight into what a lot of your options might be. And so in determining your net worth within the toolkit, there's a worksheet that you can use to take a look at what your assets might be, to take a look at what your liabilities might be, and really start to get an indicator of what your net worth is, and then use that to then identify what options you might have in kind of making a post-disaster recovery plan. That's where really having that spending plan also comes into plays, because following that plan can a lot of times help you avoid some impulsive decisions that might address the problem right away, where having that plan and really calculating and knowing what your options are will tend to have the effect of setting up for success, not only in the moment but long term as well. And so then in the cases of having a situation where you're in a negative net worth, then in those circumstances, that's where possibly borrowing funds or doing those kind of things, that's where it's going to lead to those options, and looking at your debt to income ratio and credit and those kind of things. It really it lets you know what your options are in terms of liquidating, and if liquidating really isn't an option at this time, then that's where it's gonna point you into exploring other options as well. So debt to income, when you're looking at that, it's a really great indicator of what you can afford. And so when you're making that calculation, you're really taking a look at your monthly gross income, right? And you're comparing that to all of these the debt that you have and the payments that you have to make in a given month. And so when you take that and divide those payments by your monthly gross income, you're gonna come up with the ratio that's going to suggest what you can afford. And what I mean by that, and it's something that lenders look at every time they do a loan. And so if you're coming up with where 35% of your income is going towards debt payments, that number and below is considered pretty good, and suggests that one could afford more debt. When you start getting up to, say, 45%, 55% of where your monthly income is going out to pay debt, that's where it starts to get a little bit trickier. And so not only is it a good indicator for you to know, but it also lets you know kind of what a lender might be thinking. So if you're up to 55% or even 65%, then that's where it can kind of give you some insight into what a lender might say or what a lender might be concerned about in terms of borrowing funds to help out with post recovery situations.
So Sean did a really great job of sharing why it is so important for survivors to step back and take just a little bit of time to assess their financial picture, so they are better prepared to make those financial decisions. Now I'm going to pass it to Becky, who's going to take us to the second step in the process.
Thank you, Sarah. At this time, we'd like to take a look at, thank you, the concept of determining net worth. And when survivors go through the recovery process, it's important to take a look at this concept, which includes the total assets minus liabilities equaling the net worth. And it's essential then to know more than one's monthly budget in order to make sound decisions. And Sarah talked about taking the time to think about where they're going, what their expenditures are, etc. So knowing one's net worth will help make then those financial options visible and identify possible strategies. So you might say, what is net worth and why does it matter? And net worth then is the current value of one's financial holdings, and the net worth takes into account assets, which are the physical properties such as a home or auto, or intangible rights such as money that someone might owe you that have values. Assets can be very helpful, especially during this time for survivors, because just looking at potential selling them if desired for extra cash. Liabilities are debts or amounts of money that one owes to someone else, and liabilities can be short or long term. Short-term liabilities are generally paid off within 1 year, and long-term take longer to pay off. Liabilities can be secured or unsecured. Secured liabilities would be such as a mortgage or auto loan, where there would be a pledge in order to pay the debt. Unsecured liabilities, on the other hand, do not have an asset pledged and are based solely on one's credit worthiness. And you might think of debt load for the unsecured liability. So in essence, the key is it's important to get a net worth statement, that snapshot of one's current value of one's financial holdings. And so determining one's net worth will provide valuable information that can help in the recovery process for survivors. So it's important then to take that time and to consider many different options. And so for survivors, that snapshot is critical, and this form, which is what is my net worth, which is provided in the curriculum, is an excellent tool that can help survivors walk through the net worth that they may have. And in looking at this, they would have information to determine if it was a positive or negative, if they would be in a position where they might be able to leverage more money then for repairs or rebuilding or relocating. Another consideration would be, are there assets that could be sold or cashed in to assist the survivor in the recovery process? And I know in the Northland in 2012, we'll never forget the flooding here in northern Minnesota and Wisconsin. And my brother-in-law is a professional photographer, and he actually salvaged some of his equipment that was not damaged in the flood crisis, and was able to sell a few of his cameras that helped him in the recovery process. So I think of that story and my brother-in-law in regard to that. But on the other hand, one does need to consider consequences of cashing in any assets, and especially if it's a retirement account. So in looking at determining net worth, it's very, very important to take that time and think through the evaluation individually and as a family. So think of assets in their current value, liabilities and their current value. Identify any changes due to the disaster. Again, I'm thinking of my brother-in-law. He had some equipment, but he did lose some as well. So for him, he had a loss of equipment in the disaster. Cars, homes, all of those things that we may think of. Some other strategy considerations that are very important are as follows. One strategy that can help determine net worth would be thinking of then, could the assets that are paid be sold or cashed in? We talked a little bit about that. Could assets that are not completely be paid for and termed non-essential, could they be sold and used to pay remaining debt? Financial professionals can be key in helping further discuss and brainstorm ideas. Creativity goes a long way, and it's always amazing to see what people come up with as possible solutions as a survivor in meeting their challenges. And consider tax penalties and consequences before cashing in long-term assets. So all of these things are so important to think of and to take time then to determine net worth. At this time, I would like to hand our presentation to Lori.
Thanks, Becky. I just want to mention one question that we had that came up in the chat area, and the question was regarding when we were talking about income, and what about someone who may be self-employed, for example, and have income that fluctuates from month to month. And the answer to that is to look at what the minimum amount that a person would have from month to month to plan with, and to work with that figure, and then go from that point on. We often work with people that have varying monthly income, and so that is our recommendation. If Becky or Sarah, you have other recommendations that you want to put in the chat area, I'd appreciate that as well. All right, and so we're moving on to step 3 then, and that involves determining if one has the ability to afford making certain payments after a disaster. And even before the survivor begins to explore all of the options available following a disaster, it's important to know early in the process if they can afford to take on additional debt. This quote from a disaster survivor illustrates the difficulty in the financial decisions that need to be made. And as you read through that, you can see from the quote that this person wasn't feeling very secure in the idea that they should pay off the existing mortgage and take out another mortgage. Families are often feeling financially insecure during disaster recovery, and as helping professionals, we need to help them think through their decisions, although ultimately the decisions are theirs to be made. And this tool, Can I Afford Another Payment, helps survivors decide if they can comfortably take on additional debt. This involves dividing total debt payments by gross monthly income. And if their debt to gross monthly income ratio is 36% or less, they may find that their income is high enough to cover debt payments. There may be some flexibility for handling additional debt. However, if their debt to gross monthly income ratio is more than 36%, their income may not be enough to handle their current debt and may imply that they're less flexible if expenses increase. Case managers working in a recent flood in North Dakota shared with us that survivors found this tool to be the most valuable, as it helps survivors to make the best financial decisions for their own individual situations. And so let's take a look at the younger family's situation. Excuse me. And this is how they used the Can I Afford Another Payment tool. To start with, they totaled up their monthly debt payments, including their regular monthly mortgage, their car payment, credit card payments, and additional monthly payments for medical and potentially a new disaster recovery loan. This totaled $1,213 in monthly debt payments. Next, they looked at their income, and Sam and Joan's combined gross monthly income totaled $1,215. And to determine their debt to gross monthly income ratio, they divided the total monthly debt payments by their monthly gross income. And this resulted in the younger family having a 0.288 or 29% debt to gross monthly income ratio. And so that fifth step then is comparing the debt to gross monthly income ratio to what financial professionals suggest as an affordable percentage. You heard Sean talking about that earlier in the clip. And since the younger family's ratio is less than 36%, they may have some additional flexibility in handling other expenses. And now we have another Sean, a disaster survivor, and he is going to share his experience related to taking on additional payments.
Never going through a disaster before. This was whole new territory for us and for everyone in the valley to basically figure out what can we afford to do. And the main piece of that is, number one, we had to take a look at what we're bringing in every month between a husband and a wife working full time and what our expenses were before the disaster. So what we sat down is we figured out maximum what can we afford to do in terms of more loans.
Okay, so you can see how important that Can I Afford Another Payment tool can be. So at this point, let's go to Sarah to discuss credit reports.
Thank you, Lori. All right, so the fourth step in assessing one's financial picture involves reviewing one's credit report. And a credit report really provides another snapshot of one's financial picture. Reviewing one's credit report is helpful for many reasons, including to collect information if documents were destroyed during the disaster. They might have been blown away in a tornado or floated away in a flood. And so the credit report will provide names and contact information on different credit accounts that folks may have. And then the second reason is to inform future financial decisions. The credit report is just one more piece of information, so one more piece of that picture puzzle as one tries to look at that whole situation. And so knowing one's current situation can aid in making financial decisions. So a credit report contains a lot of information. And so typically when we apply for a loan, the lending institution will also assess our credit report, and they look for a variety of things. First, they look at the amount of current debt. Then they look at, have payments been made on time, or are people habitually late making their loan payments? They also look at how long someone has been using credit. Are they new consumers, or do they have a long, successful history of being a borrower? They look at recent applications for credit, and one of the things they think about is there potential for the individual to become overextended due to recent applications for credit? They also look at the number and type of credit accounts. Does the individual have a healthy mix of credit, or do they have an unhealthy amount of credit card debt or installment loan debt compared to other types of debt? They will also look for any negative credit history, such as garnishments, liens on property, bankruptcies, and other judgments that might affect a loan request. Individuals can receive a free copy of their credit report once each year from each of the 3 main credit bureaus, so Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And folks can request a copy of their credit report from Annual Credit Report, and they can do that online, by mail, or using the phone number on the screen. And so requesting a credit report through annualcreditreport.com provides the credit report, but not the score. So if a credit score is needed for a loan application, the financial institution is going to run their own credit report and of course request permission to do that, but they will get the credit score that way. For most other purposes, the free credit report should meet everyone's needs. While we see a lot of advertisements for credit reports from a variety of sources, it is not necessary to buy anything or to give a credit card number to obtain one's credit reports. We strongly recommend that folks be very leery of offers received through mail, phone, maybe email or pop-up ads on the computer, because they may not always be legitimate, and so we suggest folks really use annualcreditreport.com. And oftentimes, many of these other sources use different formulas. Annual Credit Report uses the FICO score, and that's what lenders use. And many of these other sources of credit reports use different formulas, and so it's not really comparing apples to apples when you want to know what the lenders are seeing. So we're going to do a quick poll here. Congress had directed the Federal Trade Commission to conduct a study of credit report accuracy every 2 years, 2004 through 2012, and there should be a final report coming out here in 2014. And so the study examines accuracy of consumer credit reports using, they used a nationally representative sample of consumers with credit histories. So let's see if we have an idea of how many credit reports actually had mistakes with this poll question. So the question is, what percent of consumers had errors on their credit report that may affect the likelihood of receiving credit or the terms of credit received? So we've got lots of guesses going here. And this is kind of a stab in the dark at statistics. And it looks like most people are going for that higher amount. So the answer to this particular question was 5%, but let me share just a little bit with you. In the study, 20% of the consumers disputed errors and had modifications made to at least one credit report. In many cases, the change to the credit report had no effect on their score, but 13% of the consumers experienced a change in their score due to their dispute. But when focusing on change changes in scores that could impact a consumer's credit risk classification, the study found that 5% of consumers had errors on their credit reports that may be affecting the likelihood of receiving credit or the terms of credit received. And when we talk about those terms, that means the interest rate or the length of the loan. So how attractive was the loan that they were being offered? So bottom line is that there are a lot of mistakes on credit reports. And so in addition to reviewing one's credit reports, if they find any mistakes, they should address those. And so in the toolkit, there is a sample letter of credit-related dispute that we encourage folks to follow up on. Now, if they're finding minor mistakes that aren't so big, they could circle that on their credit report, set it aside, and address it later on when they work their way through the recovery process. But if there are major mistakes that are going to impact their ability to get a loan at attractive terms or terms that they need it, they should address those items. So how to maintain a good credit report? We're going to go through this quickly. So payment history. Make those payments on time. Send those bills in earlier, those payments in early. Avoid companies that say for a fee they'll fix one's credit. And a big one is to stay current on student loans. When we're looking at amount of outstanding debt, it's recommended to keep those credit card balances low, to avoid taking on new debt, to pay more than the minimum on credit card balances to avoid extra finance charges, and again, to make those payments as soon as possible to avoid those late fees. When we look at the length of credit history, it's really encouraged to have a long-term credit history with at least one financial institution. Oftentimes we hear of folks who do that credit card hopping from 0% interest for 6 months and then they jump to the next 0%. That may save a little bit in interest, but it's not showing that long-term history with a creditor. Also, being sure to review those credit reports each year to check for accuracy. If one's name has changed, whether from a marriage or divorce, it's important to review the credit report to make sure that things are reported appropriately. And if an individual is married, it's really recommended that both spouses have some things in their name so that they each are building that credit history. When we look at applications for new credit, it's really recommended, whenever possible, pay with cash rather than using credit, and then apply for credit only on an as-needed basis. When we look at the number and type of credit accounts, definitely shop for credit that has a low annual percentage rate and no annual fees, and have and use only 1 or 2 credit cards, not a wallet full. A few other considerations: live at the same address for 5 or more years, buy a home and pay the mortgage and utilities on time, stay at the same job for 3 or more years, and give a street address rather than a post office box or general delivery address. So these are just some tips for folks as they work to maintain a good credit score. Now Becky's going to walk us through step 5.
Thank you, Sarah. It's very important then for survivors to be able to summarize their financial situations and to note the feelings that they're experiencing, to examine resources that might be available and ones that they can or cannot have access to, and to really think through the reality of being prepared and to explore possibilities and whatever that they might access to meet their needs. Creativity is a real key piece in all of this. Again, to mention that it's amazing to hear the stories that are there. And here I'd like to just note the basic concepts of looking at summarization of financial situations, just what we mentioned. So a time of opportunity, mixed emotions. For some, it may be of relief, others, anguish, anger, a whole realm of potentials. In the toolkit, there's a very helpful tool that helps one summarize their current financial situation. What is my current financial situation? So here's a form that survivors can walk through to help them think through what their realistic picture is financially. And here in this step, it will help survivors summarize the preceding 4 steps and ensure that they have a thorough understanding then of their financial picture. The financial situations certainly become very complex, and therefore Unit 2, there's information on working with a financial professional, and then in Unit 9 it examines a review of resources. So knowing the big picture is very important to help survivors have a speedier recovery from disaster. And here you see the second page of that, and there's some questions that are very helpful to examine. One in regard to the monthly budget spending plan. Was the budget usable for the family or individual? In other words, did they meet their monthly obligations prior to the disaster? And this certainly has an effect. Does it appear that the family will be able to meet their expenditure needs? Is there a way to reduce expenses or increase income? Is the family able to access available resources? So all of these questions are very important. In addition, there's the net worth. That's important again to determine, as we talked about earlier, and also the debt to gross monthly income ratio. What was the debt to monthly income ratio? Is it less or more than the 36%? And what does that tell the survivors about their ability to take on more debt? So again, taking that time to reflect, to think of all that's important for information. At this time, we would like to hear from you through another chat, and we would like you to share what other financial information might be important to consider as survivors are making decisions about their future. And for this, if you would type in your answers in the white box below the chat, that would be great, and we'd see what types of answers that you come up with. In other words, what are some of the unknowns that might cause financial challenges or barriers for survivors? Any thoughts on this? Oh yes, pets, that's a good one, can't forget about them. And new responsibilities, yes, from other dependents. Some good ones, right, sometimes there's a shift in responsibility, certainly with disaster time periods. Job stability, college savings, health issues, great ideas. Increases in costs because of the disaster, yes, looking at insurance, very good answers. Repeat disasters, yes, those experiences. Keep a log of passwords, oh, very important. Any other thoughts? Retirement goals, yes, all of the comments shared, very important. And relocating, yes. Yes, certainly. Take a couple minutes or a moment here. I think someone's still typing, which is great. Okay, but I'd like you to thank you for your comments. And here we have one more. Yes, just moving and loss of family support, friends, all of that. Excellent, excellent comments. Thank you for your comments, and certainly very important to consider in this whole process.
Becky, I think since we're running a little late on time, we're going to skip the next chat and have Lori bring us to a close.
That's fine, and we'll hand it to Lori. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky and Sarah. Well, just to kind of wrap this up a little bit, we want to remind people that in Extension, our philosophy is to provide people with tools to make their own best decisions. And you see from the comment here that this is something that people that have used the toolkit have felt. They feel empowered, and they are empowered when they're making stressful financial decisions in disaster recovery. Again, we want to remind you of the toolkit and its availability, and we will provide that URL in the next slide as well. Remember that, again, we have customizable options for the toolkit if you should need those as well. Again, here are objectives that we had for you today, and we hope that you feel that the webinar met the needs in meeting these objectives. And we want to remind you of the next 2 webinars that we'll be hosting, and those are February 18th and March 18th. And you see the information there as to where the archives are located. And again, as you receive emails about the upcoming webinars, we will provide that information. We'd like to bring in those web links and file shares one more time here for you, and make sure that we have those available for you as we close out the webinar. Again, the web links are AFCPE verification form if you should need that through AFCPE to receive your CEUs. Our evaluation, we really feel that that's an important piece so that you can help us to make our webinars better and to provide information that you truly need. And then our file shares, that certificate of participation, and our PDF of the slides that you saw today. We'll leave those things up there as we also provide our information, our contact information. It's kind of hard to see with those downloads, but I do want to make sure that you have an opportunity to access those file shares particularly, and to download those. We should mention if you click on the item and say save to my computer, those will be saved to your computer. As you are looking at the web links, those will take you out to that particular site. So if you'd like to do the evaluation right now, we'd appreciate that as we close. And otherwise, those links are available in the chat area. And again, thank you so much for participating today, and have a great afternoon. We look forward to seeing you in the next webinar.